upheld by the Supreme Court in other states. Tell us specifically what is different about what they're trying to do here in Ohio and how it's operating in other states.
Well, in some of the lawsuits that have passed, and I believe one is Indiana where they filed a lawsuit, they had to show that there were people who could not afford an ID in no way, shape, or form. So those are some of the reasons that that case was thrown out. Once we see the final version of this bill, 194, or whatever passes out of the Senate, we will be able to sit down with our attorneys and go through more specifics and make sure that we have all the means to file a lawsuit that will be upheld in court.
Just to follow up on that point, in fact, it was discussed in the Senate Government Oversight and Reform Committee on yesterday, which I'm on my way to now. The issue is whether anyone can get a free ID. Indiana provides for anyone who doesn't have an ID to be able to get one by the state. Our committee chair thought that our bill followed that Supreme Court decision. However, this one says at this point that only if you're indigent will the state pay for the ID. So that's the difference.
And do you have to have the driver's or the birth certificate provision to get the free ID or reduced ID, whatever they're offering?
Whatever the requirements are in order to get an ID. And most requirements include a birth certificate to prove that you are who you say you are.
Senator,
to get the Social Security number or to get a government ID.
If they amend the bill to make it free to everyone, would that somehow make it acceptable to you?
There are still many provisions that do not address the needs of the many. So including a free ID is just one of the many onerous provisions. Many of us believe that education of the voters is critically important, particularly when we keep changing the rules of how, when, and where to vote. We don't even let our voters know where they're to go, what they need to take with them, how they're to vote. And that's not included in this legislation. So we can't find money to help our voters, but we can find resources for other measures.
In addition to providing a free ID to everyone, regardless of their income, race, or background, the Supreme Court has also said that the ID has to be available in a convenient manner. So that means extended hours on the evenings and on weekends, as well as in many, many more locations than the current BMV offices exist. And this bill is supposed to address voter impersonation, which accounts for 0.0000025% of the votes cast. So it's negligible. If it was a real problem, we would probably be happy to go along with it, but it's not a problem in Ohio, and therefore must meet. There's no rational basis for this bill, so it must have strict scrutiny and must meet those requirements. Free ID for everyone, convenient locations, and extended hours.
Thank you.
And I just wanted to add a comment about the Supreme Court. There was a time in this country where the Supreme Court said separate but equal was the law of the land. The Supreme Court was wrong then, and the Supreme Court is wrong now. You know, Dr. King said there's a difference between unjust laws and just laws. This law is an unjust law, and again, our ability for all of our citizens in this state to vote should not be contingent on whether or not they can afford to have an ID to show at the polls. We should want all folks in this state to participate in democracy. This is shameful.
If they do fix the thing where the voters could get a free ID, everybody can have a free ID regardless of income, do you still have grounds to sue and block the law?
We will have to look at the policies that are in the bill once it is passed, but I'm sure, based on all the unjust provisions in this bill, we can find something to sue the state. And we believe that it can be upheld. As a matter of fact, no ID should be required anyway. You have to go through enough to register. The insult to say that you have to have your Social Security number to even register to vote is actually an insult. To say that poll workers don't have to help you locate where you're supposed to be voting is an insult. The fact that you would tell me that 10 days I can go and vote in person, but I cannot go on Sundays, Saturdays, and the Monday before the election is an insult. If you're going to have an election process, make it open and stop having all these carve-outs to make it more difficult for people to vote. And the fact that you could tell me that I cannot mail as Board of Elections, mail to my constituents to tell them when an election is and where they're supposed to go vote is a shame. Everybody should have as much information as humanly possible to know where and when they're supposed to go and vote. This bill is just horrible by all means. There's no way you can slice this pie differently than this. That is horrible.
When you look at this bill, Senate Bill 5, do you see a concerted effort to go after constituencies that support the Democratic Party, and maybe an effort to weaken the party?
This is definitely an intentional attack on the base of the Democratic Party. We know that if they could stifle the vote of the most loyal base of the Democratic Party, that being African Americans, minorities, and low-income people, then that's going to hurt the turnout for Senate Bill 5. And the fact that they want to put this resolution on the ballot to bring out the Republican base to overturn some of the provisions in the Obama health care plan is also an attack. They're one and the same. We all know this. We know that is the one reason they're putting all these provisions in place now, and it's all intentional. If anybody has anything, Mr. Chairman?
I appreciate the question, and Representative President Williams is absolutely correct. Case in point, one of the sad underpinnings of term limits is that there is no collective memory as it relates to previous debates. Ironically, the now Secretary of State and the now Chairman of the Republican Party helped usher through the last substantive changes to Ohio's voting laws about 6 years ago. You can correct me on the years. But that measure passed out of the House with bipartisan support. And the ranking member of the appropriate committee for the Democrats at the time said that although the bill had changes that should be coming, he could support the bill because he knew that then Representative Kevin DeWine, the chairman of the Republican Party today, and the then Speaker of the House, John Husted, had negotiated with the minority, of which I led at the time, in good faith. One of the few occasions, Joe, you'll ever hear me say this. I agree with John Husted. Voter ID is not needed. And if the Senate Republicans pass this measure, there has to be a fallback option. To the point that Representative Williams made about Social Security numbers, we're opposed to that. But if there is going to be a fallback measure, there has to be some alternative, as Edna Brown pointed out, for those Ohioans who don't have access to birth certificates, to those Ohioans who frankly don't have access to the B&B to go collect their free state ID. There are so many measures in this particular bill that go against Senator and Representative and then Speaker Husted's support 6-7 years ago, that his opposition is now marked on this particular bill. Additionally, to the point of about a collective effort, amendments are not prepared at the last moment on a whim. This is a strategy that is being initiated by Senator Keith Faber and others in the Republican leadership of the Senate to one, disenfranchise voters, to affect the outcome and the turnout as it relates to the repeal of Senate Bill 5, and it's about ownership of the Republican caucus and the Republican Party going forward. It's not, it is not the subject of a front page news story, but nonetheless it's important to point out that the divisions within the Republican caucus, most recently the appearance of the opposition of the Secretary of State, former Speaker John Husted, to this particular piece of legislation, means that this is a concerted effort by the Kasich administration and those very hard right-wing members of the GOP caucus in the Senate. And we'll push back collectively for Democrats, independents, and like-minded Republicans, whether it's Senate Bill 5 or this particular onerous measure to repeal and restrict the rights of Ohioans to enjoy the franchise. There were times when governors in universities in the South stood in front of federal marshals and little African-American kids who wanted to go to school and said, I have to protect the state law of Alabama. That didn't make the state law any better. Frankly, it was unconstitutional then, and it's unconstitutional now.
Mr.